I started my career, obviously, with ideas like this. I did not build. And I went through 16 projects that were aborted, one after the other, so I was the master of abortions. And the big projects I was imagining that would come, the big reconstruction projects, did not happen. So 3 or 4 years down the road, I finally get recuperated by the entertainment industry. And I became the architect of nightclubs in my early years. So this is my first project, B018, active at night, and this is when the sun comes up, and the woman plays with her crotch on her way up, and he's running away with his lover. The guy passed out, and the bouncer doesn't care. But B18 is a very complicated story because it was built on a former refugee camp in the quarantine. It was a refugee camp for Armenians in the 1920s and for Palestinians in 1948 and on, up until 1976 when Beirut was divided in 2 sectors. And at that point, the Christian militias wiped out the camp in a few days, cleaned it up, and it was a very ugly story, and we don't go back, we don't talk much about the ugly stories of the war, again, amnesia. But this remains still very visible. As you can see, this is the quarantine. It's a very scarce fabric, and this is a very dense fabric right across the highway. And this is a very absurd situation you see here because we are on the littoral side, so on the seaside, which traditionally is developed, and then development goes inland. But what is happening here is exactly the opposite. The littoral side is still very scarce. The quarantine was doomed, if anything. The city kept on sprawling northbound and bypassed the quarantine, which is literally at the edge of Beirut by the port, which should have been prime area. And to this date, there's not much happening in the quarantine except the slaughterhouses, the garbage company, the tanneries that stink, army barracks, a few light industries, my nightclub and my office. There's nobody there. There's something strange about the quarantine. Maybe this is what attracted me to that zone. So how do you build a nightclub, a place of debauchery, on a site like this when you're trying to resist this amnesia? So B018 starts at the parking level with a parking circuit, a carousel, where the cars are parked very respectively and very all around the club itself. And if you're driving a Ferrari, they'll park your car here, or you can keep driving around as the club extends to the outside. If you're driving a shitty car, they'll park it in the back. And B18 is a building that extends to the parking because its roof opens up when it wakes up at night. So it's a building that sleeps during the day and wakes up at night. And when it sleeps during the day, it's completely invisible. It is really about preserving the void, the incredible void in the quarantine. The building is only 70 centimeters high at its peak. All of it happens below the ground. And you can see here an incredible contrast between the fabric of the quarantine on this side of the highway and the incredibly dense fabric right across the highway. So the scars are very visible in the fabric. On any aerial photograph, you'll see a hole right on the northeastern edges of the city. That's the quarantine. And the building wakes up at night, goes to sleep during the day, wakes up at night, goes to sleep, up, down, up, down, up, down. See, it works. And everything about this building is wrong in terms by the industry, by the construction industry standards. And you have to understand that I had never worked for an architect prior to building this thing. I had worked on my own. And when I first designed B018 and tried to show it to contractors, they all looked at me like this was unbuildable. This was not a serious proposal. So I built this building with a garbage truck manufacturer, and it was a piece of cake for him. This was a building that was supposed to last only 5 years. It is now 13 years old, and it still works. The roof is open and closed every night, many times, and it still works. So the contractors were wrong because we built with a very tight budget, and the only thing that failed in this building was a waterproofing membrane, which is a very standard thing in the construction industry. So the contractors were the idiots, and our alliance with the local artisans was great because it taught us that everything is possible if you bring back artisanry into the act of building. So this is B18 before it goes to sleep. When it wakes up, it's got one panel that flips up and panels that slide down. My office is not very far from here, and what I enjoy most about B18 is hearing it late at night when I work late at 3 or 4 in the morning. They say boom, 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 boom. The bass that comes out of this hole in an area that was doomed, that has no life around it because nobody lives in the quarantine. And it was the only place where we could make so much noise. Instead, B018 was recuperated by the Western press initially as a very sensational story. And I became the bad boy who dances on graves. I even read a very strange article by a German journalist who said that I had found bones as I was digging the foundations of my club. So it fell in the register of this very sensational war architecture, which was not necessarily my intention. And as I told you earlier, I think the most important thing about this building is that it inflicted life, it injected life in an area that was totally doomed. This is me. And this was part of the Johnny Walker photo shoot. So you will see a lot of me during the Johnny Walker photo shoot. They're very beautiful pictures. And this is Rafi al-Hariri, our prime minister, who was assassinated in 2005. He also stood on the roof of B18, like me. See? My third project is also an entertainment project on a very critical site, which is the former demarcation line, Damascus Road. This was West Beirut, this is East Beirut. And when, at the time of our intervention, the building next door was still squatted by refugees who lived without handrails or windows in catastrophic situations, mainly Syrian workers making $150 to $200 a month, which wouldn't pay you 2 meals in our restaurants, right next door. My client was a visionary because he was the first one to build on Damascus Road. But this is, again, these very difficult projects that you don't know whether you could deal with or not. So we've decided to make a building that talks about the impossibility or the absurdity of its presence on this specific location at a very specific moment in time. And above the ground is just a reception tower, which contains a circular reception room that's going to suck the guests into the space below. And above that is what you usually don't see, the nostrils of the building, and they are the compressors and the mechanical systems. Nothing inhabitable above ground. This is Yabani at night. And when you're below, your only relationship to the outside is the sky, God, and nothing but the sky. But you're in complete denial of what is happening literally behind the party wall. And this is the circular room that sucks you down and takes you down to the space below. There are 2 very, very impressive couches. It's a very glamorous way in, and you land in the center of the bar that you see around the circular elevator. And this is a view of the tube in which the platform moves up and down, so that people can enjoy their dinner at $100 a pop without having to worry of what is happening literally behind the wall next door. And Yabani is a very precise plan, again, a very precise device, as I look at my projects not as contemplative buildings, but really as devices. I call this in French the dispositif, that could trigger certain behaviors. So they are not representational. This is me again, the Johnny Walker ad. See, I'm standing very proudly in front of the entrance of Yabani. 893 is another one of these developments which was very difficult. 14 meters of facade on a 55 meters deep plot with 15 meters of denivellation, 2 cores. And the idea here again is that you can experience the site, the neighborhood, and your apartment from the outside through a circuit, cross ventilation on all spaces, and very, very narrow slabs with a split section. And you can see how the building is literally shaped by the way it adapts to the site and the circulation and the hugging of the plan from the outside. So this is the way out of the living room up to the bedrooms, from the family living, looking across to the other balcony of the same apartment. Again, a walk through the apartment from the outside, hugging the plant from the outside. It almost looks like a musical instrument. I did not intend it. It's really the plant that did it, and we did a nice garden below. I also worked on smaller residential projects. These are two small twin villas in the mountain resort at about 2,000 meters of altitude, where we've decided to turn our back to the southern facade and to the street. So there is no vertical facade here, but one oblique plane with one straight flight of stairs that takes you up to a very narrow pool at 2,000 meters of altitude, where you have a 360-degree views of the mountains below you. So you really feel like a god up there. It's fantastic, and it completely opens up to the north, where it's shaded. This is the way up. This is me again. A bit confused. This is another villa we've worked on a very, very nice site above the Baruch Cedars Reserve. Had an exceptional client who walked on that site, was given a tour by one of our politicians of the area, and once he stood on the top of that mount, which was shaved by the Israeli army in 1982. So the top of the mount was shaved off to give way for a platform that is about 80 meters of diameter. And when they arrived on top, at that point you can see the B.F.A Valley and you can see the Mediterranean. It's impressive, you're above the clouds. And my client looked at our politician and said, I want to die here. But it was impossible to sell him the plot because it's state property. But a deal was made, supposedly, that would enable my client to enjoy the site for a few years. So they sent me that client, and they asked me to do a very, very sensitive intervention on the site that would not be too massive. And the first thing I presented to my client was a panorama, 360-degree views, where I've split the different parts of the program according to the orientations, and I told him, you will not have a house. This is about observing, really, and enjoying the site. There will be almost no material intervention on the site. He was sensitive enough to love it. But when I presented the first scheme to him at one of the earlier review sessions, he realized that the building had mullions, and the facade had vertical mullions on the glass, and he was not happy with that and kept on telling me that I was a charlatan because initially it was about nothing. So he didn't want to have mullions holding the openings of the windows, which were to be 5 meters high, curved glass, which was impossible. And I kept on telling him I cannot seal the facade without mullions. And so one day he brought his yacht to Beirut and invited me to the machine room of the yacht, which is a 70-meter vessel, and took me down and showed me the turbines, the two turbines that propel his boat, and explained to me that these two turbines were, this is the only private vessel in the world that was propelled by these types of turbines, which are developed for military submarines so that they do not emit any vibrations. And at that point he told me, go back to your office and you have to get the mullions out of the project. I understood that the man did not take no for an answer. And we've taken a very basic principle of the windows of the car that slide down in a track, but then the tracks are still there, so we took the tracks down. And this was, in theory, we sent this to a facade consultant in Germany who quickly answered us 2 weeks later that it was 7.5 million just for the facade, which was okay for my client. In the center of my plan, because it's a circular plan, which is the inhabitable part is the extremity of the plan, which is only 10 meters deep. Inside is an open sky courtyard, and in the center of the courtyard is a hole that collects the rainwater and the snow water and takes it down into a sphere which is 18 meters in diameter, which gets filled by all this water, and the water is heated by photovoltaic cells that are spread around the reserve, so that you have constantly, like a volcano, you have steam coming out of the hole, and my client could swim in that sphere in the belly of the site where he wants to die, and we would finish this in marble. This did not happen, fortunately.